Going to be eating a shock dart, but he's able to makes it win anything.
Sam, defend your team because they haven't won.
Strap yourselves in, it's another 1 hour episode.
Oh yeah.
Spike defused.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Press Forward to Defuse as I do my customary slide into frame here. We got the usual suspects on cast. How are we all feeling this week? It's a little bit of a quieter week than perhaps we're used to in the Valorant ecosystem. There have been no, 37 different roster changes here. How are we feeling about Valorant this week, Sam?
Fantastic. I just got announced that I'm doing game changes, so I couldn't be happier. I'm so freaking excited. Oh, man. Thank you.
Oh, your microphone's doing that fun thing. Sam's mixer is going to give us some fun this time, folks. So apologies for any headphones users. It might get weird. It might get loud at times. Paul, how are you feeling this week?
I'm feeling great. I mean, now that Masters is over, it's calm in one way for me and not calm in another because I have to watch 80 games from 30 regions now. I can't just watch whatever happened on Masters this past weekend, right? So, it's a good time, though. We're getting some good Valorant.
Yeah, I mean, we appreciate your sacrifice watching that many regions.
Oh, no, I have to watch a video game I enjoy? Woe is me.
And then get paid for the knowledge I have? Oh, God.
Life is tough out here as a broadcast talent. Life is tough as a caster.
True.
Well, let's dive into it because we do have some things to talk about this week. You can never get through a week without some roster changes, despite it being in the middle of the VCT season. So let's hop into Run It Back, presented by Temple University, our segment where we talk about the news from the last week and talk about what it actually means for Valorant esports. First bit of news here comes from across the pond over in Europe, and it's a nice blank screen. Ascend have added 2 players. There we go.
Hey.
They've added Vac and Monster, which is that just Monster or is it Monster? Just Monster?
Monster would have been better, in my opinion.
Is it just a monstrous cow?
Maybe he's French.
I digress.
Monster.
I think he's just a monstrous
He's
steer.
very not.
Monstrous steer. Yeah.
What is a monstrous steer?
You know what a steer is?
Really bad driving?
A steer is a bull that's had its parts removed. It's been gelded. That's what you call. That's what a steer
I didn't know that.
I didn't know specifically the thing about the parts.
You didn't. Well, that's what makes something a steer as opposed to a bull. No. A steer is a bull that is no longer reproductive.
We're getting way too into this.
Let's talk about the actual.
I'm here to educate. Anyways, let's talk about this roster. Vac and Monster come in. Obviously, this is the Ascend roster that won champs, right? And then immediately fell off a cliff. There were major issues
some
with
asterisks on that.
Okay, hit me with the asterisks.
True.
Give me their excuses.
Some of their players couldn't play.
That doesn't help.
They were playing with subs. I mean, it's a bit of a screw up in that case.
Zeke had some rough stuff happen too, but for me, it's just these 2 players have big shoes to step into, right?
Yes.
Because Keyless and Bodencold as individuals were undoubtedly very good. Apparently we've heard rumors that behind the scenes things weren't going well synergy wise for Ascend even before they won champions. So that was sort of just duct tape on a few of the issues while they were winning. So it makes sense to get new players in the rotation. But they got a lot to live up to.
I mean, they come from 2 very huge rosters. I say 2. I mean, Vac, I believe, he's just come off Vitality, but I believe he was on Heretics as well. Monster's just come from Big. So they come from some pretty big rosters with, that have done relatively well. So this isn't a stab in the dark, take a shot on some young blood and hopefully they'll succeed. These are pretty tested players. And I think that if they can slot in well with the team, it should be fine. Thankfully Ascend got to keep their spot in VCT despite a lackluster performance from them. So they didn't have to go through the promotion tournament and the stress of wondering if they're still going to be able to come back to VCT next season. But they do obviously need to step up. Like you guys said, this is the champions winning organization at the very least. And to fall off a cliff after that, it's not great.
Yeah.
And I mean, they've got the guy, right? You've got CNED, the guy that everyone always wants to talk about as the guy in Val. And there was a time where it looked like he was potentially going to get poached by a North American organization, and he opted to double down and re-sign with Ascend. So there was clearly a time where CNED wasn't happy with the vision, was maybe thinking about leaving, about moving on. I think his brother tweeted something about, like, responded to a tweet or something where he's like, don't worry, we're getting him out of there, kind of thing. Like, they were ready to jump on a plane and get the heck out of Dodge. And whatever Ascend pitched as the vision for the future clearly won him back over. And now it might have just been a massive bag. That happens too sometimes. But whatever it is, you've got a star player who brings that dynamic play. You need to put the team around him.
I mean, we heard what Artis's buyout supposedly was, right? I can only imagine what CNED's getting paid in comparison.
So here's the thing, right? It is, I would say that Artis had more name brand recognition coming in to Valorant, which, especially for contracts that were negotiated towards the beginning of Valorant's competitive tenure, which is what CNED's old contract was. I don't think CNED was probably getting compensated all that much relative to his impact in the game, knowing that Ascend was not exactly the biggest of organizations, and knowing that CNED, before he popped off in this team, was not a big name. So I think that his new deal probably accurately reflects his value.
Yeah, exactly.
But you can understand why a player would maybe, obviously if you outperform your contract as a player, you're going to want a new contract, and orgs are going to be like, what if no? Which is always, like, literally the friction could have just been contract talk.
No.
It could have just been
trade offer incoming. I receive, you keep playing for the same amount. You receive playing.
Nothing. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, it's better than being benched.
Is it
sometimes?
though?
Well,
anyways,
I mean, especially if your benching contract cuts your pay in half, which a lot of benching contracts do. It is definitely better to be playing than benched. But we'll move on here, unless anyone else has any thoughts on Ascent before we skip on down the lane. No? All right, we're skipping on down the lane. Next big news, Big making a change. Got B off the roster because he's back to Counter-Strike as a coach. Absolute legend in that game. God be a historic player. He's coming back to coach his old roster in Big, so he's not leaving the organization. He's just shifting teams, going back to where he made his name. And as a CS boy, I love it. I do love it. It's really nice to see.
I know
he's
that
a legend.
Zesht is absolutely heartbroken. Like, he is shattered by this news. So, but that leaves a big question mark for Big, because what do they do now to fill that gap? That's the big thing that I'm curious about. Big thing.
The pun that you can't avoid when you're talking about this roster. It's so unavoidable. I mean, he is a huge piece, right? Massive brain as a player, massive brain as a leader. You rarely hear anything but good things from his teammates as well. There are so many players in CS in particular, where obviously it's a very long legacy, who played with him, who came from him, who talk about what an impact he had on their in-game leading, on their thought process when approaching the game. He is a massive figure in terms of influence, particularly in that German scene, but also around the world. He competed in North America at one point as part of NRG. He's been on the stage with a lot of different players, and his presence has been felt, and that's something that was a huge asset to that Big Valorant team. I don't think he's been around long enough in Val to have that same sort of tree where we're going to see the effects going forward, but I think that not having the ability to grow that tree, to grow that influence in Val, is a major loss for the scene.
Yes.
Thank you for your input there, Sam. Yes.
I validate you, Mike.
That's better than what my input was going to be, which was just going to be sure. Because I don't know anything about
CS. If you say so, Mike.
You got to start watching some CS here, Paul. Sam's
I have
being
started
converted
watching
here.
CS.
Have you?
Only when Valorant's not on and I'm awake. I'm bored.
Here's the thing. Like, this isn't a CS versus Val take.
That is the
because
correct
I
take.
recognize that I do have like a major CS bias, just because that's where I do a lot of my work and obviously have my roots. But it's not about CS versus Val. It's a matter of, if you're curious about Val storylines and like where players come from, so much of it is traced back to CS. So much of it.
Then I gotta go back and watch like 20 years of tournaments.
Yeah,
watch the majors. Just go watch majors. Honestly, watch like
I'm
major
gonna keep
playoff
watching
runs.
Valorant, and I'm gonna keep talking about Valorant.
Whatever.
It's fair
We'll
enough.
move on here. We'll move on here. This next
Valorant
announcement
podcast, by the
we've
way.
kind of already talked about, so we're not going to talk about it a whole lot more. But FaZe have announced their roster. They've got their whole, graphics up and everything. It's Poach, Superman, Poise, Dicey, and Baby Bay. So obviously they've rebuilt that team around Baby Bay. That's sort of always been their plan. And they still got JDM as the head coach, which. Again, like I'm sure he's doing a great job, but it just boggles my mind seeing JDM back in that role. But I FaZe, obviously we'll talk about it in a little bit. Early rewards on this new roster, I would say.
And I mean, 5 really good players too, right? A lot of which who have struggled to actually be on successful rosters for any long term, right? Like, Dicey was on 100 Thieves, and then 100 Thieves was good for a little bit, and then not so much. Superman and Poise were on Rise, which was a really good team, like last LCQ, and then maybe not so much. So I'm a little bit worried for the longevity of the success of this team, but they have like a good amount of firepower. I'm excited to see what ceiling they might reach.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, we've only really had a taste of what they're capable of, and that has been pretty damn good. I mean, it hasn't been a completely flawless run through the qualifiers. They did drop a few maps here and there, but for the most part, I mean, they've looked really good. So, I mean, they've beaten out the revitalized TSM, the revitalized Sentinels. I mean, they had a pretty decent run through, and I think the true test, well, obviously, is going to be, so what happens when they actually get to the main event? I mean, that's where it's going to matter most, but the fact that they've made it the main event is pretty good in and of itself.
Yeah.
It's also cool to see, I mean, obviously Dicey has been competing as part of this team for a little bit, so we knew this was happening, but it is cool to see Dicey back in the top-end organization, top-end roster.
Sure.
Never really did feel good the way things just sort of fizzled for him post 100 Thieves. Kind of felt like he just got stuck in a corner in a weird way. So it is cool to see Dicey back with a top-end org, getting that bag and getting that chance to really show up as a competitor. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think this roster's spicy. Again, we'll talk about it, but they qualified to challengers, which is just you're immediately like, yeah, we announced our roster and we qual. Boom. We did it right, guys. We did it right this time.
We did the thing.
Did the thing. That's just the immediate feedback.
It's more than 100 Thieves can say.
That is true. Accurate. We'll get
more than
hold on.
several teams.
Hold on
can
that
say.
thought.
Yeah,
hold on that
true,
thought.
it's
We're getting
true.
there. We're getting there. We're sticking to FaZe for now. We're sticking to FaZe for now.
Okay.
For sure.
Also, some sick intro videos, which is just what you expect from FaZe.
Yeah.
And there's only one player on this team with a questionable history in a previous game that makes me concerned. So that's fine. We're not going to talk about that more. We'll move on here. Moving on to the next thing. Mad Lions announced their organization. They are getting into Valorant. They just dropped their CS team, so I guess that budget's getting shifted over to Val. XMS, Brody, Doma, Cray, and Polvix. How do we feel
This is
about
10
squad?
star, right? Like
Yes.
they
This is
literally
10
just
star,
bought
yeah.
10 star.
They bought 10
Okay,
star.
cool.
Bought, yoinked. I don't know exactly. They brought the coach over as well, Spin. So they literally just like uprooted the whole thing, and they were like, "You made this? I made this." And they've also to completely separate. They've also decided we're not competing in the Northern European VRL. We're competing in the French VRL. So completely different. We one of these things is not like the other. But I'm really excited for these guys. I mean, this was a really good team in VRL. I think did they make it to the third place or second place, somewhere there in the promotion tournament. I mean, they got, well, not the promotion, but the playoffs for VRL. They did incredibly well. They were looking super strong, right up there with XL and Alliance. Like, they were one of our favorites to go the distance. So there's a lot behind this team, and I think Tainstar did a lot for them, obviously, but now with the backing of such a big organization, I cannot wait to see how much more these guys are able to accomplish. I think this is a solid team.
How are they playing in the French VRL, though?
I was gonna say, this is where I get
XMS.
confused about VRL rules, and I'm glad that I'm in NA and I don't have to deal with that, because only one player on this roster is French.
They have a Dutch sub. Is that enough? Appear is apparently signed as their substitute, who is Dutch. Is that literally just to get them into the French VRL?
Well, this is the thing, because I don't
is the Netherlands
know.
Included?
I'm not sure which countries. No, because I'm pretty sure that. I'm actually not sure which countries fall part of which VRLs. I know that obviously Northern Europe is UK and Nordics. Spain has like a bunch of different ones. Spain, Portugal, whoever else they have. So yeah, I couldn't tell you for 100% sure which regions, but clearly they do, do the thing. There's another team like in Polaris that have got like one player that fits the bill on the main roster, but they have a sub. So like the sub thing is genuinely a route that can be taken.
It's just it just makes a mockery of the whole regional, like we're gonna have domestic in-country leagues, which I'm just gonna say I think is silly in Europe, where everything's so close together and there's no actual like geographic region to really divide things up. It never really made sense to me, but it really does make it look completely foolish when you're like, yeah, XMS is French. Sure, they're in the French league. Like there are no actual. We're gonna make it region lock. We're gonna make it nationality lock, but also we're really not gonna look too close. It's just kind of funny to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, hey,
It's like what would happen?
Oh, go ahead.
It was meant to be 3 out of 5 at a point, and then I think they changed it to 2 out of 5, and then they changed what constitutes a what is the word? But there's a word for like a person who has become part of that country. So like if you've moved
naturalization.
There, so, I think so. That could be it.
Sure.
Yeah. So they changed a lot of the stuff. The problem with this system is like, apart from what Mike was saying, if you look at some top teams that have players from a variety of different countries, and say they fall out of VCT, now they're in VRL, and everyone's like, but you don't meet our qualifications, so you'll need to change your lineup.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck?
Or in this case,
work.
apparently it's just like, hey,
or just add a sub and play in the French league.
Which, like, okay,
so
look, maybe this is just Riot's strategy to donate a salary to a substitute player for each roster, right? Get more people salary. But I kind of wonder what a contract is for a player where they're like, hey, we need you for your passport. And they're like, cool, am I going to get playing time? They're like, yeah, probably not, man. Probably not. Okay, cool. Am I going to get a full salary? Probably not. But like we'll toss you some scratch. I would be curious to know what kind of sub contracts are compared to the main roster, right? Like I don't know that Mad Lions is necessarily paying a top end contract to begin with.
Sure.
Maybe they are. I have no clue. No information on that. But I would be curious to see what like a percentage is for Apier compared to his teammates. That's just me being curious about the economics.
Within Benelux are eligible to compete in France. So
what?
anyone who's Benelux.
Okay, so that's the Netherlands, I think, is
Yeah.
included. So that's what it is. They're
okay.
they're using. That's why they have a sub. It's just I don't mind
And
it
Belgium
because
as
like
well.
I don't
Yeah.
think it
Netherlands
makes
and
sense
Belgium.
to do the region lock things when ping's not an issue for Europe, right? If you're within Europe, you pretty much have good ping to anywhere else in Europe, or at least sufficient ping. It's not going to be an issue. But you know, it's just kind of funny to me that they have all these regional rules, and then we just constantly see teams completely abuse the system.
Yes.
Which whatever. It's just silly. It just makes it look very silly. Moving on, Giants pick up Quals.
Yeah.
Keels?
Kyles.
Rhymes with
Yes.
piles. Anyway, Giants. How do we feel about this pickup?
I like Kyles as a player. I was surprised when Ascend dropped him in the first place.
Yeah.
And on top of that, Giants could really use something to help them like get over the fact that they have sucked for like it's a bit of a rough way of saying it, but let's face it, when was the last time they actually achieved something? Everyone was
Did they
super
achieve something?
excited.
Like last year.
This is what I'm saying. Like, they brought on David P. They built the roster around him. Then David P. got kicked, and they've, like, consistently been shuffling their roster over and over again with, like, no results. Which sounds like a lot of teams that we talk about here. But, yeah, it's getting a little bit ridiculous. This is another one of those orgs that want to be achieving more, and unfortunately they just haven't found the right fit. So Kyles is a good pickup. Hopefully that actually works.
In 2021, they have 10 former players, 10 players who aren't on the roster anymore, who went through their roster, either as stand-ins, 2 stand-ins, 8 full-time signed players
quite
who
a few.
cycled through the team.
That is so many.
Well, and it seems like this was just a straight up trade, right? Monster from Giants goes to Ascend, and Kyles goes from Ascend to Giants. So
Yeah.
I think that he's going to have a very big role in this roster, especially since Giants have like kind of, they're not the Giants from early last year. It's a lot of players that don't have the same sort of pedigree, especially compared to literal champions winner Kyle's, right? So he's got a lot of work ahead of him, but like if he can be like a veteran voice, a teaching voice, there's a chance that he can sort of help mold this roster into something at least somewhat good.
They're sponsored by Chupa Chips, the lollipops.
They're sponsored by a lot of people apparently.
What the heck
Burger
are
King
Chupa
and
Chips?
Kit Kat.
They're a brand of lollipops that you don't really get in the U.S. They're definitely. I mean,
Yeah, what
I
explain
think
why
they
I've
are
heard
a
of them?
Spanish company. But
Why
you
would
get
you
them all
call
over
a
the place
chip
in
a
Europe.
lolly? Why would you call a lollipop a chip? I don't understand.
Because I don't know. It's not. It's the name of the company. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't look too close. But that's just kind of a
Okay.
funny sponsorship to see come through. All right, moving on. Alliance, we kind of already talked about this. They've officially dropped the whole roster. Apparently, they are looking to build a Nordic-focused team, but for the time being, they have no team.
Yep.
So we'll see.
Which
if
is
they actually do build it.
interesting because they will be competing in Polaris in like the next week or so.
Better announce that team, Alliance.
Yeah.
Better announce that team.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Team of
That
five
is going to be a bit of an
stand-ins.
interesting one. They literally at the moment they have Cider and they have their coach, who are both Danish. Interestingly enough, Zik is also Danish, but he got the boot, so unlucky, I guess.
Rough.
Yeah. So now we need 4 more Nordic players, which. I mean, I don't hate the idea. Alliance is a Nordic organization, so sure back
Play
to
to
their
your base.
roots, and yeah, of course, and they're playing in the Northern Europe region, so sure, go for an actual Nordic roster and that actual region representation that we were talking about. But their roster was so good. And I'm wondering if this isn't in preparation for, and obviously we're going to talk about this a bit later, but the changes that are coming to the competitive scene in Valorant, because I wonder how important VRLs are going to be going forward. Because we've spoken a little bit about how like the VRLs have been a bit disappointing in terms of like viewership and how they can help organizations with brand development and stuff like that. And that's one of the reasons I think that Mad Lions were like, yeah, we're not competing in any, we're going to France, which is slightly better branding, because obviously all of the VCT stuff that's in French is covered on the French VRL Twitch channel, so everybody's there. So I would wondered like in that particular vein, like why would Alliance? But I think it's like a looking forward kind of thing, and maybe it works out.
It is interesting as well, right? In that it seems like the roster churn as a player in sub-top Valorant is brutal right now, right? You see it in North America, you see it in EMEA as well. It is there's just a churn, as it feels like teams don't know what they're looking for, so they just kind of like try on different shoes until they find one that fits, which is just, you're building something, you're building a project for the last year and a half at this point for Alliance, and they've just kind of, obviously they've dumped the leadership who was in charge of it. Banks left the team, or they got rid of Banks or whatever, however that one worked out. And then it's just like, all right, we're done with this team. We're gonna completely reform our team and try and figure things out from there. It's just rough as a player, man. These guys go through so many different orgs in a year. It's wild. It's the Wild West out there. But let's talk about what may be changing and settling the West, shall we say. Valorant has announced their roadmap, sort of, for 2023. Their plan for the next year. And frankly, it's franchising, folks. It's soft franchising.
It's basically franchising, yeah.
It's franchising without a franchise fee yet. It's interesting. And the conversation, the discourse around this is really interesting as well. Suffice it to say, the pyramid is sort of something that illustrates this nicely. They put out this nice, convenient pyramid that helps sum things up, which I'm trying to find right now. Here we go. So global events, that's the champs and masters, basically. Brand new premier level international leagues. Now, these are leagues that are going to expand beyond one country, beyond one region, and basically be what Valorant wants to be the standard level of competition, your week in, week out competition, the equivalent of what VCT challengers are right now. And then
so this is where like NA gets lumped in with BR, right?
Yes.
And then
and
EMEA is
LATAM.
continuing with its thing. Okay. And LATAM, okay. Dope.
Yep. So that's one of the big leagues.
Good luck with that. Y'all have loud.
I think it'll be all right. I'm curious about where they put
I think it's
people.
gonna be awesome.
Well, and I'm curious about how large are each of these sections, right?
Yeah,
like
right.
how many
spots
teams
you got?
especially for
Yeah.
something like NA EU or NA Brazil and LATAM, where it's one really big region and then two still somewhat big regions all getting lumped in together for one competition. I think the same amount of teams will end up at tournaments like Masters and Champions, right? That like 12-ish mark that Riot's been shooting for this year. But how many teams play in the international leagues before that, right?
Yeah.
Like, is it going to be the top 3 teams from NA? Is it going to be the top 5 teams from NA? Is it going to be, we have a total of like 20 teams? Are we going to do something crazy like LPL does, like over in China for League of Legends, right? Where they have like almost 30 friggin' teams. That to me is determines the success of this system a lot in its early stages, because if you cut it too short, there's not going to be enough teams for like people to care about all at once. But if you make it too wide, then there's just not the greatest level of competition, right? So it's a tough balancing act.
I think it's really interesting in that the language that they used in the announcement about the international leagues, the way they describe it is it's premier competition, Goliath versus Goliath competition between the world's best players and top tier organizations on LAN and in studio. So with audiences, by the way, health and safety permitting, they put the caveat in. But what this means is I don't think there's going to be that many teams. I think 8. My guess is 8. And I don't know how they divvy that up between regions, but I will guess that we have an 8-team tournament so that you can run 2 4-team groups and sort of run a bracket. And what's going to be really interesting as well is promotion to international competition. I think this is really going to draw down the scene to a certain extent in terms of who are those orgs that are involved. When you look at things like League of Legends, right? I mean, if you look at the LCS, there are how many competing teams? There's 10 teams in the LCS, right? 1 team goes to MSI. Yep. 1 team goes to the international competition. And that's like, that is not, compared to the size and breadth of the North American Valorant ecosystem right now, that's not a lot.
I mean, also, NA League of Legends is just bad.
Sure, but it's the same for
also,
the LEC.
MSI isn't necessarily the best measuring stick for that, because 1 team from every region goes.
Yes, but the
but
LEC is also 10 teams.
Yeah,
I'm not even talking about how many teams get promoted through or like move through.
Sure.
I'm talking about the size of the league. Now, if we're assuming that this is a league that also includes Brazil and LATAM, which it is, right, for the NA region, like how many spots are there going to be? Are there going to be 5 for NA, 5 for BR and LATAM? Are there going to be 4 for NA, 6 for 3 for BR, 3 for LATAM? Are there going to be 4 for I don't know how they're going to distribute this.
Yeah, it's tricky. I think a lot of the distribution will depend on results this year, right? I mean, that's what
100%.
That's what Riot has. Well, but that's what Riot's already kind of shown to do, right? Like EMEA won champs, and then they got a million more spots than everybody else at
they got
internationals, right?
But this isn't a league that changes depending on results. This is a franchise league. This is you're getting. They are describing. They describe the teams that are involved as long-term partners. That means once they're in, unless something goes real wrong, or they can't foot the scratch they need, or there's a scandal or something like that, they're in.
Well, and
this is the thing, because they don't specify where that begins. Like, does it go all the way down to the domestic leagues? It can't do, because the in-game competition system allows you to qualify for the domestic league. So is it going to be at the international leagues? In which case, what is the point of doing the domestic league if you know you're not going to get to the international league? Like, they haven't really given a lot of information on that.
Based on their phrasing, we'll incorporate a long-term partnership model with a select number of teams in each league. I would guess half will be permanent members, and then there will be spots for qualification in from the regional leagues that they've talked about.
That's where we get to the other part of, when franchising was going to come up, because we all knew that this was going to happen for Valorant, right?
It seemed very likely.
The thing that is always on everybody's mind whenever an esport goes franchising is, what is vertical mobility going to be like? Because There have been
Mhm.
esports where if you don't foster your semi-pro scene, your amateur scene, if you don't give ways for new players, for excited players, hungry players to actually get involved and move their way up the ladder because they are good, then your league will flame out and not accomplish much of anything. Or at least that can happen regionally at the very least, right? Like, that's one of the things about NA League of Legends is for a long time, there wasn't much fostering of like homegrown talent. It was just everybody buying talent from all over because they had money. And now the NA ecosystem is, well, it wasn't a struggle. It's kind of building its way back up there now that there's more investment. But, you know, you can look at the Overwatch League as well.
Oh, yeah.
Contenders was dry, unbelievably dry for a while once franchising hit, right? It started out okay because teams had academy teams, and then they realized we don't have to do this. We're not putting money into the tier 2 scene. And then, I mean, that's, you know, one of the many things that went wrong with Overwatch League. But there are a lot of ways to do this wrong and only a few ways to do it right.
Yeah. It's tough too, right? And here's one of the things that I think is very key, is that they don't tell you how mobility is going to work, except from international leagues qualifying to global tournaments. Yeah. And they also talk about, at the base level, the quote-unquote path to pro, which is that there's a new in-game competitive mode that is supposed to more directly tie in towards regional leagues, I guess, right? Like if you're at the top end, you can qualify into domestic league. I don't know how that would work. Presumably you have to play with a team then, like you have a set 5 in a competitive mode within the game. I'm not sure exactly how that looks or how that's different from existing open qualifier systems. But and also, here's the thing. Here's one of the things they talk about. We're excited to present an even higher goal beyond Radiant and to provide esports organizations with a new method of scouting their region's most promising talent. That doesn't mean a team of that most promising talent could crack into the top end. It means they can get picked up by top end organizations, is the way I read that phrasing. So this is, I think, you're going to see it
kind of feels to me like again, I mean, we're gonna keep going back to League of Legends, I guess, because Riot. But like they just introduced their Champions queue kind of thing, right? And I wonder if this is supposed to act similarly. Champions queue didn't end up doing very well, as far as I'm aware. But it was supposed to be something kind of like this, where a lot of the top end players would be like in their own sort of ranked ecosystem. So I'm wondering if that's sort of what this path to pro is going to be, if it's just going to like give detailed stats on like a lot of ladder players and how they do in matches against each other.
I don't know.
The other question that I have is, so when you take a look at the international leagues and it says that this is how you will qualify for Masters and Champs.
Yeah.
Is that, so it's broken down into 3 like bigger regions now. So you have NA Brazil, LATAM, EMEA, and then like South Korea, APAC, that Australia.
Yeah.
How are they going to like ensure that the international competition remains international? Like there is a world where we don't see teams from certain regions, like smaller regions. And when I say smaller, I mean like when you break down the big region into NA Brazil, LATAM. So maybe we don't see a LATAM team at Champs.
Well, I mean, it gets even messier in Asia, right? I mean, we were talking about like we don't know about North America, LATAM, Brazil, but you got SEA, Korea, Japan, South Asia, and Oceania all making up like one of these international leagues, right? There's a very real chance that like SEA and Korea just dominate, or Japan and Korea just dominate, right? Depending on how many teams they actually want to end up sending to global tournaments and how big the league is, right? Like I mean, you know, if there's only 8 international, if there's only 8 teams in those international leagues, like you were saying earlier, Mike, and we want to have 12 at Masters or whatever, that means we're sending half of each international league, right? Which it works very strangely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think 10 is also, it could be 8, it could be 10, it could be 12, right? Like there's different numbers. I don't think it fundamentally changes the way it's going to function. Obviously, bigger is better in terms of getting more organizations involved and having more spots for those franchise spots, but you also don't want to dilute your product. And right now, looking at NA and looking at EMEA, because those are my biases of the most stuff that I watch, there is distinctly, I would say, usually a top 8 that's really in contention. Top 10, you could do top 10, right? And if you're gonna have promotion spots, I could see there being 8 partner teams and 2 to 4, spots that are in contention. But even then, I have the question of, are you going to have spots that can actually fluctuate all the way from the bottom to the top, or is it going to be you're going to have spots that can fluctuate from the top league to the more regional league? And it's going to be like you bounce between those two if you're in relegation. And then how do you justify that to an organization that they don't have a guaranteed boutique spot? They have a potentially volatile spot. Is it about how much they can invest as a buy-in fee? Because right now there is no buy-in fee. That's something that they specified, right? It is just it's a soft partnership. There's no lock-ins yet. It's about exploring whether it's going to be worth it for organizations or whether organizations can do it. And then presumably somewhere down the line you'll do a legit buy your franchise spot.
I think that's one of the good things about this system, in my opinion, is the fact that we're not just immediately jumping into these are the organizations we're going to be doing, right? Like they're not just immediately saying like, hey, 100 Thieves, Sentinels, C9, you guys all have a lot of money, buy your spot right now, right?
To be fair, they're probably going to be involved. But...
They probably already know.
They're probably going to be involved.
I bet those teams know the number already. I bet they know the franchise number. I bet that's been communicated.
Probably. But this is nice though, because for now, it's a case of like, maybe a smaller organization still has a chance, because as I understand it, there's going to be like these huge meetings and you have to present to Riot and you have to say, this is our long-term goal. This is how we're going to brand. This is how we're going to look after our players and make sure that they're all right. This is how we're going to X, Y, and Z. And maybe Riot sees a smaller organization and goes, you know what? You've got a good plan. So since you don't have to buy in, we're going to give you a chance. And we'll see how it goes. And I'm sure that they can re-look at whatever orgs they decide to partner with. So I quite like this for a start, because it does give orgs a chance. If we were going straight into a buy-in franchise league, like what happened with the Overwatch League, you're just getting huge powerhouse organizations that are buying in, and every other org in the world is just like, oh well.
Yeah,
we're not playing in contenders because no one cares about that.
Those huge powerhouse orgs do not necessarily buy people who know what they are doing. Right? They don't necessarily employ people who know what they are doing. We have seen that before.
Dallas Fuel.
Now, ideally they should, and I think that's why one of the reasons, like you were talking, Sam, I like this system is because it gives people a chance to prove that
it's
whether
sustainable.
Or not they've been noticed by 100 Thieves or TSM. They are still worth having at the very, very, very tippity top of Valorant esports.
It is also interesting to, I wonder what's going to happen to organizations that have cut their teeth within Valorant but don't necessarily have the same brand recognition outside of it. I'm talking about like XSET. Like XSET's a new team, right? Obviously they've got some great people behind them. They've got some serious esports industry veterans, and their Val team is dope. They've done a great job of managing it. It's a great team. They've got some serious groundswell support behind them. But I don't know how deep their pocketbooks are relative to a Cloud9.
Yeah.
They certainly don't have the same brand value that a Cloud9 or a G2 does. Or an Ascend versus, a G2, right? Ascend won champs.
Yeah.
But are they, do they have the money, the cash flow, and the wherewithal to get a franchise league spot? I don't know. That's kind of curious.
I mean, you look at an org like X10, who didn't pay their team and their whole team had to leave.
Sure.
Like, they're not coming back to the franchise league. That's for damn sure.
And I mean, there are even more teams. Like, we look at EMEA and NA because that's what us three are familiar from. There are even more teams like that when you start breaking into Korea and Southeast Asia, right? Like think about like Xerxia or Paper Rex. Paper Rex is not like some giant international G2-esque organization, right?
Yeah.
But imagine like if Paper Rex do well the rest of the year and then they can't afford a franchise spot next year, right? So that's again just another reason I'm glad we're not doing the full hard committal to franchising as of yet.
Yeah. It is going to be really interesting to see how this shapes up. I wonder how much more information we're going to get ahead of 2023 as well. Presumably, as we get close, I would imagine that this is what we've got, and then it's going to be pretty radio silent on this until
next Masters.
Until the big announcement,
I'd say at Champs, right?
Yeah.
I'd say Champs is probably
that
where you
seems
get the
more,
real
I mean,
window. This is where they, they put the information out there. They see community feedback. They process some information. They explore conversations with their partners about things, and then they sort of synthesize the information and figure out what their plan is. But it's really interesting. This is really interesting to follow. Franchising was always going to come, based on the way Riot has run their esports before, and the way esports organizations like to have these models for sustainability and profit. But it is going to be interesting to see who actually finds that space. Is an organization like, say, a Complexity, where Complexity is a big organization with a lot of funding, but also they haven't really done shit in Valorant. They've had a team the whole time. They've supported a team the whole time. Haven't accomplished a lot. But if you're looking at teams to buy a franchise spot, and you're looking for organizations with structure, with a history of excellence, and with the funds that they're not going to be gone in 10 years. So is a Complexity going to get picked over, say, I don't know, in a Crew, right? Obviously, this is a dramatic example. A Crew hasn't done anything to get to that level yet, but they were close. They were knocking on it. If they had made challengers, who knows what happens? So I don't know.
Speaking of
really
challengers,
still a lot of
challenges.
question marks,
Segue. Boom, Paul.
Woo!
Nailed the
Nailed it.
segue. Take the host badge right now. We're moving in. VCT NA Challengers Qualifier number 1 happened. We're got the number 2 coming up this week, but 4 teams have already qualified through. It's pretty sick. NRG, FAZE, TSM, and LG all qualify through. Quite the shakeup here, right? LG,
Is that a bracket
they're back.
for ants?
Bracket for ants.
I cannot. I
It's
recognize the version 1 logo.
It's not Cody's fault. Dang
Cody's
it.
getting ambitious with trying to fit these brackets in. We don't have handy, neat, pretty graphics. And
I appreciate it, Cody.
it's challenging.
I mean, I appreciate Cody's attempts, but
I think I want like a calligraphy representation next time. Cody, get out. We're gonna get you like a set of the fancy ink brushes and things. And you're gonna have to do an
God.
artistic representation of it, I think, or maybe watercolor, a watercolor bracket, or just MS Paint, my style. But yeah, no, these brackets are really tough. It's tough to actually synthesize them. But suffice it to say, NRG, FaZe, TSM, and LG qualify. How do we feel about those 4 teams making it through?
I'm very intrigued, right? I will be frank. I did not expect TSM and FaZe to come out opening weekend and make it through. I thought there was a chance they might make it through second weekend. But I was actually somewhat excited watching the TSM versus 100 Thieves games, right? Those 2 matches. Dang, I'm actually somewhat impressed with TSM. I haven't said that in a very long time.
Wardell was the problem. Wardell was the problem. I mean, look, he was ringing for version 1 and they did not make it. So all I'm saying is Wardell's the problem.
we've been hinting at that for a while, though. Not that it was a problem, but he seems pretty inflexible.
Yeah, and I mean, if you you watch the V1 versus NRG game, I actually don't think that Wardell being Wardell is the problem there. The problem is just they had to play with a sub instead of Whippy, right? That left some weird communication things, and their post-plant setups for version 1 were very much a struggle. I think V1 actually have Whippy back for this upcoming weekend, so I think they're gonna do a lot better. I could be wrong on that, but I'm upwards of 70% that I've seen Whippy on Twitter saying that he's actually in the States now or something. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure. So I'm not worried for version 1 or actually 100 Thieves at this point, but I am excited for the teams that made it through.
I do want to point out quickly, Sam, your point about inflexibility from Wardell. 7 only played Chamber. So it's not like they changed up that aspect, right? Their offer plays Chamber. Their offer
yeah, but they had Wardell
Chamber.
opping on Sage.
Well, now they've got Chambers. Only Chambers. Steady Chamber.
So teams that did better than I expected. FaZe, TSM, Sentinels.
They did better than you expected?
They did so much better than I expected, dude. Holy shit.
You had low expectations.
Yeah, you're going to have to defend that
Holy
take. You got to
moly.
defend that
I
take.
really do.
Explain.
I really do. They've looked lackluster for the longest time. They make a roster change, and okay, fair enough. Kempeki is a really good player, but what were we expecting them to suddenly come out swinging the way they have in the past because they made one roster change?
But who did you, for your expectations, so who did they beat that you didn't think they would beat? Because they beat Pugstars.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't have known how this is the thing, I
lost to
wouldn't have known
FaZe.
how the bracket was going to play out. I'm talking about like going into the start of it, right? Like if they
Okay.
wind up in the bracket against someone else earlier on, like if they come up against, I don't know, NRG earlier on in the bracket, right? Like in round 1 of the playoff bracket, then I'm like, yeah, they don't make it.
I mean, they
But
didn't make it.
they don't make it even earlier than what they didn't make it actually.
It is. I mean, of course, also worth noting, Sentinels did lose to two teams that did qualify.
Sure.
Even though Sentinels didn't make it to a qualification match.
Yeah.
Not that really helps their case, honestly, if you like use the eye test and watch those games. Bro, my problem was that like I actually don't think Sentinels played like horrifically this weekend. But everybody just bullies them on split, dude. Like it's so funny watching them lose like 4 split games in a row and like keep letting it through the map ban. I don't know what's going on with that.
Do we have the Tarek tweet on deck? Because Tarek jumped in on the
Oh, God,
on the dog pile here, saying asking
was
Sentinels if they
something.
needed a crowd fund to put legitimate infrastructure behind the most popular team in Valorant. Which you know,
Those responses though.
they just say, look, they're great at the Twitter game. They're great at the
Yeah.
Twitter game. But like,
Whoever's their
it
social
is
media
true.
manager kills
It's
it.
like at this point, Sentinels themselves finally recognize that they need a coach. They tried to get a coach. Based on the fact that they don't have a coach, it was clearly Sean Garris that they were trying to get. Like all the signs pointed it to being Sean
This was
Garris,
hinted at
and
it,
they
yeah.
haven't announced anybody. So they clearly lost that bidding war or whatever it was. Maybe it's that they didn't want to bring on DDK as well, and he wanted that as part of it. Maybe it's just that the visions aligned on 100 Thieves, where they knew that they were going to be able to actually rebuild a roster as opposed to having to stick with the roster that existed. Whatever it was, Sentinels lost that gambit to get a coach. They got to
Tom's
find
coach now
someone else,
calling it.
right? If that was the one guy who you'd be willing to let coach you, then figure out your fucking ego, right? Like, come on. Like, it's just so obvious to anyone who's watching that this team has oodles of talent, has oodles of ability, and is just not giving themselves a proper chance to succeed because they don't seem to have the ability to self-reflect and adjust and self-analyze in the way that other teams do. And that's something that a coach and an analyst give you. Is they give you another set of eyes to look at you and go, hey, we suck at this. Let's fix it.
And I mean, at this point in Valorant, how many top tier teams actually do the self-analyzing without a coach? Nobody, right? Like, it's just, I cannot think of another team that does not have a coach or an analyst. Like, and actually performs well.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not a matter, at this point in Valorant's life cycle, it's not a matter of, like, are the Sentinels players smart? Are they actually good at the game? It's a matter of, like, you just don't have an outside perspective.
It's
you don't
perspective,
have that third person overhead view to analyze how everything works together more objectively, right? Like that's one of the points of having coaches, of having general managers, like analysts, right? Is that they think in ways that players don't necessarily.
I'd love to have been a fly on the wall during the whole Rockers thing because like they had a coach. And I mean, they gave him like what 5 minutes to prep them for champs. So
if I
it was
remember
going to be
correctly,
difficult.
the Raucus thing was they wanted Raucus, but his buyout from FaZe was too high.
Yeah, FaZe wouldn't let him go, and Sentinels wasn't willing to figure out. I think Raucus is still signed to FaZe. He is. He's FaZe Raucus. He's
still just,
he's
you know,
in contract
that's
jail
rough.
on FaZe.
That's
He's stuck.
Because like that was the thing with Tens. Like apparently the buyout offered from somebody. Jack Etienne said, I think it was to 100 Thieves that wanted to buy him, and Jack Etienne was like, "Oh, 2 to 3 million." And then later, like at the bottom of the article, it was like Ten said he wanted to go to Sentinels, so we lowered his buyout. Like I like that when the org says to the player, "All right, cool, we love having you. You're great for our brand, but this is what you want to do. We don't want to hold you back."
Yeah. Sure, that's a great way to frame it. I would wager Cloud9 said, shit, no one's paying $2 million. All right, what number will people pay? Let's dump the buyout a little bit, right? Like that's. I don't think there are occasions where an organization does right by a player, but I will only accept that as being like a real like, oh yeah, we just did him a solid if they outright release somebody when they request it. If you're like, Sure, we'll sell you for $1.6 million instead of $2 million.
I don't know.
We'll
like, you don't
spot
really
you the
wanna take a loss,
400K
though.
gamer.
Like,
Yeah, I don't know what the number is, but like it's just you couldn't get the price you were
Yeah,
looking for.
exactly.
That's what it is. You couldn't
See,
get the buyout.
my view of it is they didn't want to give him up, so they made the buyout astronomically high so that the other team would just balk at it and go, you know what, never mind, we don't want him.
But he benched
that's
himself. He benched
what-
himself on their roster. So unless
Yeah,
they
but he was
thought
still
he was
part
going
of the organization.
and maybe if they thought he was going to unbench himself, it'd be worth it. But no, I think they wanted to move him. I just think
Yeah,
they
I
thought
mean,
they could get more cheddar.
We talk about buyouts all the time here. I feel like it comes up literally every single week, because
Just
they're
about,
just
yeah.
It's so
they're just
fascinating.
astronomically
It's so fascinating.
insane in Valorant right now.
The economics of
considering how
esports
young
are
it is.
dumb and crazy and so interesting.
It's
Oh, so
super
somebody in
wild.
chat just said Shaz mentioned orgs blocked them from buying coaches and quoted ridiculous prices.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
That's rough.
That's what we're talking
Then,
about, right?
all
I mean,
right,
you know,
all right.
it's crazy.
But
All
this sounds like it's
But
like multiple
Here's
orgs
my
doing
question.
this.
Here's my question. Why can every other org get a coaching staff? That's only an excuse
Because
if it's the
everyone
whole
hates
system's
Sentinels.
deadlocked. I don't think that's true. Nobody is changing their price depending on which org is asking. If they are, they're terribly managed, right?
well,
like
so
places have numbers. Your numbers are usually, if you have a
Mhm.
player contracted, the number is baked into the contract. And yes, you can choose to lower it, but you can't just be like, unless the player signed the worst contract in existence, you can't just be like, nah, lol, 5 mil, fuck you, Sentinels. Like that's not
Yeah.
how it works. So
Yeah.
it's only an excuse if other teams were struggling to put together coaching staffs. They aren't. Other teams put together coaching staffs. They have analysts. They
For sure.
find people. Maybe they're not the person that you would ideally want, but it's something, right? Like
Yeah, you
everybody
gotta have a
else has a
staff.
And I
staff.
think-
Yeah.
Cloud9
This is where-
has a staff. 100 Thieves has a staff. Version 1 has a staff. The Guard has a staff. Like, what are you doing? What do you just
Well, and-
hire somebody?
I think this is where it comes down to a combination of three things.
Mhm.
For Sentinels. And we've kind of touched on these, but just to sum up. One is that a lot of the buyout prices are high, and I'm not certain how much money Sentinels is willing to spend on a coach, considering that Sentinels is a very, at least it looks like from the outside, it looks like they are a team that is very concerned about how much their branding makes them more than necessarily their winnings.
Yeah.
The
It's very
second thing
phase.
is the idea that you've touched on a few times, Mike, with Sentinels, is that they will only respect X amount of coaches, right?
Sure.
Like there's only 4 or 5 people in the game that they would necessarily let coach them. You know, I'm lowballing on that number maybe, but like a very small amount of coaches compared to other teams. So other teams have the option of picking up like lesser known, not, you know, Sean Garris quality coaches, right?
Yeah.
And having to do with it. And the third thing is, of course, just the buyouts. Like, I mean, I think an amalgamation of all three of those things makes it difficult.
I think there's
for
a
the
fourth
Sentinels.
factor.
Okay, go
There's
for
a
it.
fourth factor, in my opinion. I don't know, and we've actually spoken about this at length over the last year or so.
Mhm.
I'm not sure how much of the reins Shazam is willing to let up to allow a coach to be
Yeah.
a coach. We
Yeah.
spoke about this with MCE and about how he's allowed to be a coach. You know, he makes the decisions. They listen to him because he's fucking smart, and
Mhm.
they succeed. Whereas the big thing for Sentinels was they have these very, very smart players, good players with storied histories in various games. And for all I know, there's an ego that goes along with that. And I'm not sure that they're ready to give that much control over to someone else. I think that they were looking for someone to just be like a voice. And then they can say, oh, we like that idea, or nah, we don't really like that idea. And then they do whatever they want anyway.
Yeah, there's potentially that. I think that. Well, I'm gonna move us on from Sentinels
Sure.
after this last point because we do have other things
Good
to talk
idea.
about. And we're still running out of time. But I think Sentinels is misjudging their positioning a little bit as an organization. I'm talking about, not as the players. They are the biggest brand in North American Valorant, probably in World
Oh, yeah.
Valorant. They're huge. And they've got this prime opportunity. They have enormously popular players, right? Dapper is hugely popular. Shaz is hugely popular. Zoms was hugely popular. He's benched. But
Tens,
like
huh?
Tens. Why am I not saying Tens? He's the biggest of them all. Massive brand.
And then they're sick, you know, he's there.
But six is a big streamer now too. But
Yeah.
I don't think they recognize how much that branding can continue to be grown by competitive success. And I think that as they fade further, it'll be reminiscent of TSM, where, yeah, those players' individual brands are probably still going to be really damn good, but we're not going to talk about them the same way. We don't talk about, FAZE the same way. We don't talk about Wardell the same way. We don't talk about Sabrosa the same way, right? Sentinels stole their limelight and have held it for a very long time, but that's changing. And if they don't make it through Challengers 2, the second qualifier, you got to take a long look in the mirror, and you got to say, what do we as an organization, and again, this is less on the players, need to do to put a structure in place? Because the talent is there. The talent is still there. It hasn't changed. I think, there is a lot that you can do with this team, but you gotta give them the tools to do it. And if they don't want the tools, you force them into their damn hands. That's where I'm at. That's where I'm at with it.
Yeah.
That's the way that I think about it. But we'll move on here because there's other teams to talk about. Version 1 didn't make it. Obviously, they weren't playing with Whippy. They'll presumably have Whippy for this next qualifier. So do we give them just a full asterisk on this one?
Just about.
Watching the NRG game, I'm giving them at least a bit of an asterisk.
Okay.
Because that game was really close, and there were some rounds where V1 just made really odd decisions. And I don't know if that has to do with their comm structure. I don't know if that has to do with whatever role Whippy played in the team vocally. I mean, I think that it is not outlandish to presume that they are going to do pretty well, considering that they barely lost to NRG. It was a 2-0, but it was 11-13 both maps. And then they barely lost to Luminosity. I am still pretty confident that V1's going to make it through.
And that's with the stand-in. So, yeah, okay. We're not feeling too bad.
It was with the stand-in playing strange role.
Dude.
The Sage op, man. I mean, shout out to Wardell.
We haven't seen that for a long time.
Speaking legitimately and objectively, as much as I like to clown on Wardell, he actually, he's still Wardell, man. He hits some crazy freaking shots. He made Sage op look somewhat viable, which shouldn't happen in theory, especially against, a top-end team.
Next team, 100 Thieves. Is it too early to be concerned? Obviously, they've got another chance to qualify through.
Way
if they
too early.
Don't qualify through in the next one, are we concerned, or are we still saying more time?
The problem is, it is too early to be concerned, and it isn't too early because,
because
it's too early in terms of this roster is still really new, but it's not too early in terms of they have 1 week to get it together.
Yep.
Because what are their chances of actually making LCQ at this point?
They probably need to run through.
They need to. They definitely need to make it through stage 2 here.
Yeah.
There you go.
And they also need to do really well in stage 2. We're talking a Masters, send probably to make LCQ at this point.
To save some time, because I was going to talk about this just now, I have the same opinion when it comes to Evil Geniuses as I do for 100 Thieves. They've made some really good changes recently, and they have looked really good with these changes, but they haven't had enough time to cook. And what really worries me is if they don't make it in stage 2, what are the chances that the roster survives until next season if they don't make it to LCQ?
I think with Sean Garris and DDK heading that team, it is much more likely. We might see it retooled. I don't think we're going to see the same knee-jerk explosions that we saw from 100 Thieves earlier in the year.
Well, I don't mean drop the whole roster, but obviously then they start re-looking at things, and it's you've just put this together. It didn't succeed. Now you might see a player or two change here and there. And it's is that really?
I think we're seeing the issue with making mid-year adjustments as radically as 100 Thieves did.
Yeah.
Because quite frankly,
absolutely.
it would have much better suited the organization to do what they did in December. Obviously, they couldn't for a variety of reasons. I don't even think Sean and DDK were at a point where they would have been willing to do that in December, right? I think it was more in response to what happened with casting and broadcast stuff. But I think that you run into this situation where you just don't have enough time to really let a roster see what a roster is going to be when you completely tore it down and rebuild. The problem is, because it's 100 Thieves, because there's a massive spotlight on them, and because they cut Ethan and Hiko, two huge name players with big brands, to put in a team of much less name brand recognition players, you put more pressure on that team to perform. You put
True.
pressure on them to prove you right. And admittedly, yeah, the bar had been lowering for 100 Thieves, but they still made it. They still made it into challenges last time, right? So performing below that would not be ideal.
No.
It's definitely an interesting one there. We'll see how they do. The other one is Knights. I don't know if the same expectations were on Knights because it did feel like their run in challengers last time was a bit of an overperformance, but they have another chance to continue that and show us that it's a trend.
I kind of feel the same way about Knights and EG at this point, which was they had a really favorable run through last qualifiers. Good for them. They performed as well as they could. I mean, Knights performed better than I thought they would in the actual VCT season, right?
They did, yeah.
But I don't know if I expect them to make it back. Could they make it back? Absolutely. I think that's certainly a possibility. But it's not like a team like V1 or Sentinels or 100 Thieves where it's like, if they don't make it back, what has gone wrong?
Yeah.
Now, talking about the teams that are waiting for them, right, in Challengers 2, you've got Optic, The Guard, Cloud9, and XSET. Levels, comparing the 4 teams that just qualified and the 4 teams that are waiting, how do we feel they stack up? Do we think there's a talent goal between the two sets?
I think talent is the wrong way to put it.
Okay.
I definitely think that there is a strategic gap. I don't think it has to do with individual firepower, right? Like if you look at like who made it through this weekend, like FaZe Clan. FaZe Clan is a great example, right? I think FaZe Clan actually have a roster of 5 really solid players now. I don't think they get hard diffed by a team like I don't know, XSET or the Guard even, right? Debatably. But I think that there is a next level of understanding with those 4 teams in particular on how they want to play their own game versus just playing Valorant to beat the enemy team. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Like the Guard have a very specific style. Optic have grown into this very specific neon heavy style, right? XSET are a team that really rely on like cryocells and Zekin, and they do whatever they can to pop to have them pop off. And like though the way that they position their strengths strategically is just superior at this point. Because like these 4 teams have actually had time to like stay together as a roster. They haven't had to make changes because they were qualified, right? But B, just because I think that the support staff is really strong for all of those teams.
Yeah.
I feel like Optic and the Guard are definitely like an up here. And then you get your like C9 and XSET, but I feel like the gap isn't like astronomical.
Yeah.
It's there, but it's definitely within reach to close for the teams that have made it. So I'm not terribly worried. And I'm kind of looking forward to a potential upset here because potentially hot take, I think that Optic winning Masters was an upset. And don't get me wrong, they deserved it. They played incredibly well. I'm not trying to like lessen their accomplishment, but I'll say leading up to it, I was not expecting them to come out on top as the winners. So I feel like this is still a possibility for these 4 teams that have qualified. I mean, anything can happen.
I feel like the funny thing with Optic is I always felt like their actual level when they show up and look good was like top end, top tier, and has been for ages, right? Their problem was always the choke, right? Get to top 4, choke. Get to top end,
king.
choke. Like it was always those maps where you're like, what are they doing? They don't look like themselves. That you would have for Optic at the top end. So I think maybe if they've beaten that demon, we're going to see it more consistently.
I think you still have those moments from Optic too.
Yes.
They had like 2 really good series at the end of Masters, but you do still have those moments where like they'll get onto like into a situation where they're not 100% comfortable and they will flop around for a second. But I think the difference is that Optic have really found ways to be consistent. Is it 100% yet? No. But they have strategies, they have methods where they know like it is planned from top to bottom. Every single moment is extremely well thought out, and it gives them a lot of opportunity to not miss with any sort of nerves or choking or inconsistency.
I will shuffle us along. I do want to say one other thing, which the only team we didn't talk about in depth in this one, I think, is Luminosity that qualified, and that's because I think we all expected Luminosity to qualify, and I'm expecting them to be even more competitive this time around than they were in the last Challenger. I like that Luminosity team. I think they're continuing to build here. We'll move on. One last note, one team from each of you who cannot miss out on qualification the second time. Who can't do it?
Sentinels.
Yeah,
Sentinels.
I mean, I knew you were gonna say Sentinels, so I just shut up for a second. That's the most obvious one, right?
Sentinels TSM. That was.
Well, TSM made it, thankfully. I think the other.
Oh yeah, but
I mean, it's hard for me to say one team because I want to say two of them.
No, say one.
Version 1.
not
Yeah.
100.
If
I agree.
if Whippy is there, version 1, 100%.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I agree.
If V1 miss a qual with Whippy after they looked so damn good in first stage, that is tragic.
They got to do some
Yep.
reevaluation. Yeah. I'm gonna go out of left field and say a team like Gen G actually needs to make a run. Yeah, I know we haven't
Fair.
talked about them at all, but like
Yes.
the reason we haven't talked about them at all is they haven't done shit.
Okay, calm down,
Yeah.
Paul. Relax.
I'm just literally
Jeez,
punching down.
man.
I'm punching down, Paul. They haven't done shit in so long, right? Like,
Bro,
the-
it's not even punching, dude. You gotta squat to reach them off the
know,
ledge so
but,
that
like,
you can kick them.
they're a real team with real investment and real organization support behind them, and they just haven't done shit in so long. So I think a team like that, I think there's other ones as well, like a complexity that we look at where like there's massive org support behind them and they just kind of haven't done anything in a long time, right? And I think Gen G is emblematic of that right now. Where they got it, they do. It's that meme of the guy poking the rock with a stick saying "do something," you know.
to me,
Do
that
something.
moment for Gen G was like a few tournaments back.
Yeah,
Like
dude, I
to
don't know.
me, they
True.
already hit that threshold
but
and
they're,
fell off.
but they're
I
still
wrote
there.
Gen G off
Gotta do
after
something.
LCQ last year, dude.
Do
They
something.
have hardly been on my radar.
Oh, they got to do something. Anyway,
Yep.
we'll move on here. We're over our hour because of course we are, but we've got some other things to talk about.
Always.
Game Changers EMEA is into its playoffs, into its it's like the midway point of the bracket, but I guess it's technically the playoffs now, or I don't know how this bracket is sectioned up. Suffice to say, Sam's casting it.
It's
Sam,
the main event.
the main event, but it's also just further
Yes, there
along
was
in
a
the bracket.
qualifier. Yeah, I mean there was a qualifier, and then after the qualifier, the main event got seeded, and now we're in the main event.
Cool. Okay.
Nice.
But it's very exciting. Anything really spicy
It
so
is.
far, Sam?
Oh, 10-star in the lower bracket after game 2 because the seeding was like really wild. And right now they're busy playing up against Footballist, which could very easily be an upset in Footballist's favor.
Mhm.
So I'm a little nervous for that game. On the other hand, I mean, there are some teams that have been doing really well. I think probably better than I would have expected. I think Godsent, they're in the lower bracket, but they've done a lot better than I thought they would. Untapped are out. They came, I think, 4th or 5th in the last Game Changers, and they dropped down to the lower bracket. They got knocked out by Supermassive Blaze, which is crazy to me because Supermassive Blaze are good, but Untapped were like on another plane of existence. But that was back when they had Anya, and then Anya got yoinked to Guild, so it's tough to say. Alliance are still in it, which makes me really happy because they had a pretty disappointing performance last season. So nice to see that they're still going. I suppose it's unsurprising to see that Guild and G2 have made it to the top of their bracket, basically. They're going to be fighting off, but one of them is going to go down to the lower bracket before the upper bracket final, which has never happened before. Like, the seeding for this has made the whole tournament a freaking wild card. The one team that I'm really, really happy about is Rix. Like, they kind of fell off a cliff in the last Game Changers, and they've come back specifically after, like, Jupy took time off because she got pregnant, so she's busy, like, doing the mom thing. And she was, like, one of their star players. She was the IGL, and Rix just, like, freaking vanished. Now they've made it so far. If they win their match today, they're in the upper bracket final versus Guild or G2. I mean, we haven't seen them do this well in months, so I'm really excited for this season.
There we go. Ask Sam for a couple of upsets. Get a blurb on 10 different teams.
Sorry, I just
It's the Game
you
Changers
give me,
energy.
Like 2 minutes to do Game Changers. I can't.
We
man.
always run out of time at the end, man. But this is the playoff.
blame you.
I promise. Oh wait, you're not here next week. I was gonna say I
not.
promise we'll talk
Lucky.
about it more. You might have to literally just like video record a summary on your
Honestly, I
phone.
might just take my camera. I'm
Just
taking
do
my
it.
camera with me.
Then
I'm
do
just
it.
gonna take a good headset and
Give
I'm gonna
us-
make a plan.
Give us a report from the street on Game Changer
Love
because I
that.
was gonna say we'll give you more
Oh,
time to
Lord.
talk about it next week.
You know
after
what I'm
we
gonna
have the
do? Okay,
conclusion.
so on Saturday, I'm on the desk. And I'm actually going to be at the London United facilities. They're one of the VCT
Ooh.
teams. And there's going to be like this huge industry watch party with like casters and industry people
That's
and
dope.
stuff. I will like record some
Yeah, give
of
us a
that,
live
and
reaction.
maybe we
Yes.
can like
give us
get that on the show.
a reporter on
Perfect.
the street type vibe going from the Game
I'll
Changers
try and
watch
organize
party.
that.
That's what we'll do. Get us some good content. We'll make Cody edit something. Cody right now is like hands in head, like, oh god, not,
Oh no,
what are
not
they
like
doing to me?
this.
We'll move on. We'll get some content here for Press 4 from our reporter, our remote reporter. After we actually get the conclusion of Game Changers. One last update to talk about. NSG Summer Champs update on the leaderboard here. Just as a little key in for the teams that are going to qualify through to the Nerd Street Summer Champs event. X at top of the board, ZMMB. Behind them, T1, Aspire, Nearest Airport, Complexity, Cloud9 Academy, all in that top rung with 4K points or above. Any big shockers here on this list? Some of these teams, I mean, like Aspire, right? Not a team that we're really used to
Sure.
Yeah, not super
competing
well-known.
and a spot in a Summer Champs would be huge for an org like that.
Well, and I think you're really going to have to keep an eye on this list after this week, right?
Mhm.
Because this weekend is like this week of NSG Opens and last week of NSG Opens weren't as busy because a lot of teams were focusing on VCT prep. But after this weekend, a lot of these teams, teams like T1 maybe, teams like Zero Marksman, Nearest Airport, Complexity, they're gonna go back to these. Everybody's gonna be playing in NSG Opens because they're not gonna have
Mickey
a chance
Mouse
to play
tournaments.
in NSG. Or in VCT rather. So
mouse
this
always
leaderboard
wins.
is about to explode, and it's going to be very exciting to watch. I always have my eye on Oxygen Academy just because I love to watch Redux play, dude. He's such a cracked little gremlin. I love watching that guy play, dude. He's like 15, arguably one of the best players in NA, in my opinion.
Okay.
He's just insane.
He's your crack little gremlin. That's one way to put it. Obviously, there's a Nerd Street Online going on right now. The finals are tonight, the semifinals and the finals. We've got the top 4 here. Oxygen Academy, your favorites, going up against SOAR in the first round of matchups at 6 p.m. Eastern. And TSM Academy taking on Teal Seam as
That's a
well.
spicy
So
one,
two
too.
That's gonna be
TS
good.
teams.
That's gonna be really good.
Really
Yeah.
spicy matchups, folks. You're gonna want to tune into that 6 p.m. tonight, and then the grand finals right afterwards as well. That's gonna be some banging Valorant to watch. Predictions here? Quick predictions.
Oof.
I'm gonna just say Teal Seam and Oxygen make the finals. I'm gonna say
Yes,
Teal Seam probably wins it though. Teal Seam's real good.
Yeah, I was literally thinking the same thing, and I kind of hate you for saying that because now I seem like I'm just like a bandwagon Andy. Okay,
Okay.
I'm gonna say Oxygen TSM, and I think
there you
Oxygen
go.
win. How about that?
Nice, love that.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it to Oxygen because my boy Nerfed is gonna just rock
Fair
Shout
through.
out.
He's getting the revenge game as well. Used to be on SOAR. So revenge game there. Nerfed gamer. He knows how to scout the talent. He's a real leader there. And then I don't know. TSM Academy has impressed me when I've watched them play, so I'm going to give it to them. But I
It's a
agree.
close game.
It's very up in the air. This one's going to be spicy. I'm not sure which way this splits. This one should be fun. But we'll go for Oxygen Academy. I'm going to pick them to win this weekly. I think they've got a good chance here. We'll have to see how it does play out. Again, everybody tune in tonight, 6 p.m. Eastern, and then 8:30 p.m.-ish whenever the previous matches end up for that grand finals. That's going to be spicy. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. And also, this is going to be the end of our show. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of Press Forward Defuse, your weekly spot for Valorant esports news and discussion. We're here live every week at 1 p.m. Eastern, and Sam's going to be gone for a month, so we're going to have to go find a bunch of wild guests to bring onto the show to make things
Just hit up
interesting here.
Anders again.
We're just going to replace
Have
you.
fun.
Anders has been like completely yoinked by other podcasts at this point.
That's
We got to
true.
diversify. He's just
You know
everybody's
what? We
podcast
started
fill-in.
we started this whole thing, and now everybody wants him, and it's
Everybody
it's
wants
too
him.
busy for us.
She's a boutique
We're
podcast
trendsetters.
guest. It's understandable, but we'll bring some people through. Maybe some old favorites, maybe some new faces, maybe some spicy player interviews. We'll have to see what that's gonna look like. So tune in for the next month of Press 4, and then when Sam's back, you can stop tuning in. No, I'm kidding. Tune in every week. We'll see you 1 p.m. Eastern. Goodbye, everybody. Good night. Good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. See you next
Go
time.
watch Game Changers.
Watch Game Changes.